So what a news week, probably even a news month, I would hazard to guess. The economy continues to limp along. There's been layoffs, especially in tech, and home sales have plumped. There seem to be now several viruses that we need to watch, uncertainly. And inflation, while slowing, still has many people here and the world over scrambling as they face housing, heating, and food insecurity in the coming winter. I have to say, our outgoing and our incoming leaders, they all agree that we have some pretty big problems that we're facing. But there doesn't seem to be any reason or any agreement on how we're going to fix them. So it looks like our closely divided government is, we're all looking at that and we're thinking, maybe we're in for a little bit of gridlock, not a lot of solutions. I hope it's different, but who knows? So all that's going on. What's the biggest news story of the week? The Black Panther movie finally came out. This is a sequel, for those of you who don't follow the Marvel Cinematic Universe the way I do, that we've been waiting for since 2018. I don't know if any of you have seen it yet. Don't worry, I'm not going to spoil it for you. You know why? Because I have not seen it yet either. And even if you aren't even planning to see it, I'm guessing that you might have heard a little bit about it, because this is the hero movie that's missing its hero. Missing its hero. That's because the actor that plays the Black Panther in that triumphant and beautiful film from 2018, he died in the interim. Tragically, sadly, very young. So this movie that's just come out, instead of coming up with more great high stakes adventure and heroics, it has to grapple with grief and loss and how it's going to continue without its central character. The character who was the king of Wakanda, in case you didn't know. And he's left behind a nation that has experienced a lot in recent years. Assassination of previous leader before him, a coup in his short years on the throne, and all kinds of internal and external conflict. They're now in a place where the next generation of leaders has to find a path forward while they're still struggling with their own loss and despair. So don't worry, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but I have to say that my 18-year-old saw it. He was supposed to wait to see it with me. He said he was going to wait to see it with me. I waited for him, but no, he snuck off and saw it with a friend. But he said to me, he said, "Mom, it was really, really good. It was really sad. It was really hard, but it was really, really, really good." Now, it seems like there's something about this story. It's a story that's got so much expectation on it. People have been waiting a while. And yet there's all this deep trouble and tumult that it's grappling with. And it's a story about searching for the right path so that you can create a new and better world, and about the heartbreak when there's sabotage and loss. And that path to a new world, it just seems ever elusive, right? It seems like there's something about that story that's resonating with my 18-year-old's generation. I know many of you have children and grandchildren in that generation. I don't know if they've seen it, but I feel like this next generation is asking the same questions that every generation has as they are coming into adulthood. They, like we probably did, struggle against an imperfect world full of suffering and sin and injustice. And they're asking, what do we do when we feel like we aren't enough? Like whatever we do, we can't change that. And we feel like giving up. Where, in fact, do we turn for hope and for grace? Well, today is the last day of the church year, Christ the King Sunday. And it's the day that's supposed to contain for us the answer to that question. But how does the people, now I know some of you are citizens of the United Kingdom, you have recently received a new king, right? But I would say the majority of us in this room are part of a people who threw off kings several centuries ago, right? So what does Christ the King have to say to us? I mean, I don't know about some of you, but I see those pictures of Jesus in robes and jewels and all of that and a crown, and it's not exactly my idiom. Well, I was surprised to discover that the image of Christ the King, which does go right back into the Old Testament, I mean, we heard about it today, is an observance that is, in fact, a modern one. I found out that it was introduced by a pope in the Vatican who sat there with Mussolini on his doorstep. Think about where Vatican City is and how it's surrounded by Rome, right? This pope needed something to help respond to what was this alarming and frightening rise of totalitarianism across Europe. See, we may have thrown off our kings, but we still seem to be looking for some sort of heroic, infallible leader that will give us all the answers that we need. And, oh, by the way, while he's doing it, remind us that he or she or whoever will just take care of all of it for us and just, be quiet, don't look at whatever else I'm doing there. It's a dangerous form of idolatry. So I think there might be something in this Christ the King thing. Let's look underneath the royal trappings, go right back to the sources of scripture and try to figure it out. Who is this Christ the King really? And what does he have to offer us as an alternative to that leader that we somehow humans seem to keep going for? Well, looking at the prophet Jeremiah, he lays out for us a king who will reign with perfect wisdom, justice, and righteousness. Sounds good, right? But this king is also a shepherd. A shepherd. I mean, we got to change the whole wardrobe here. Take off all the jewel-encrusted robes and put them in something that's like, you can take it out on the hillside, get plenty dirty. Because this person, the king's role is actually to be right there in the trenches with us, gathering us together, nurturing us, helping to make us whole as one flock. It seems like the true king that Jeremiah has in mind isn't there to lord over us with power plays and to come in and wreak division and chaos, but it's a shepherd who's there to bring us together. The image of the Messiah, in fact, is not unique to Jeremiah. Like I said, it's all across Old Testament and New Testament. Comes up again and again. Centuries after Jeremiah wrote, we can hear this searching for hope is calling back to this promise from God for a king who is unlike any other king, more like a shepherd, right there in the words that Zechariah proclaims when he is witnessing the birth of John the Baptist. We read that in our canticle this morning. And he's also talking about a king that is God's agent come to set us free, to bring compassion and to shine a light into our darkness and guide our feet into the ways of peace. In other words, this king is not just sitting up there in heaven surrounded by angels and saints, but here to help all of these ancient promises unfold here on earth. Now, we get to think about these promises with the death and resurrection of Jesus. That's something that we already know about, right? I mean, that's a gospel that we're reading, that's a story that we know took place 2 millennia ago. And Paul is in that position too. So he talks about and recognizes all the ways that Christ reigns over the entire cosmos. He portrays Christ as a glue of love that's holding everything together and that permeates every corner of our existence. This is what Jesus reveals to us, the true nature of the universe, the true intention that God has for all of us. And we know that Jesus ultimately is the kind of king who ends up being executed on a cross for no crime except healing the sick, forgiving sinners, welcoming the outcast, and teaching about this kingdom of love and justice, peace and mercy for all. And you know what, Jesus, we see from our gospel, is the kind of king who is not only willing, to submit to those who kill him for these kinds of seditious acts of love, but he's the kind of king who can forgive his tormentors as he is there dying. And people mocked him. They thought that the very idea of this kind of king, well, it was kind of a farce in their eyes. They thought that kings were there to take care of themselves, to amass power, right? But this kingship that Jesus was demonstrating was the kind of king that forgives and loves even in the worst of all circumstances. He died literally for us. Now, I think that if anyone had a reason to say, I give up on all this mess, why should I bother? It was that criminal who was executed alongside Jesus. What we think was the case is that he was a political activist fighting against the invasion from Rome. He was probably a Zionist of some sort. And he saw in Jesus a king who never stopped loving, even in the face of what probably felt to him like failure of every dream that he thought he held for his people. Christ the King is the kind of king that offers light and hope and grace right on into the darkest holes that all of humanity can dig for itself. Now, I did a search on Google for Christ the King, saw what images came up. A lot of the usual stuff, crowns and robes, and you've seen it. But there was one picture that stood out for me. It was the icon that was used by a group in France with a heart and a cross coming out of the top, a heart with a cross. And it was what they used as their insignia in this group that was in Western France, resisting the terror and suppression during the French Revolution. Can you imagine a more devastating time to have been alive and watching as literally your whole world and community is falling apart? But they were saying this love and peace and justice that we have learned from Christ, it persists through all of this. A heart with a cross, a loving servant. That's who Christ the King really is. And that's whose kingdom reigns supreme on earth and in heaven, no matter how much it might seem otherwise. I know every one of us struggles against this imperfect world, full of suffering and sin and injustice, and it's easy to feel like nothing is changing. We're not getting anywhere, and we can't figure out the right way forward. Sometimes it seems like whatever we do, it just makes things worse. But you know what? We know where to turn to find grace and assurance. We know that we have a shepherd who's going to lead us in a path forward of love and peace and transformation. And the beauty is that Christ the King gives us not just a future hope, but a hope for now. Shows us how to live out of that love that's at the heart of the whole of creation. Because Christ the King showed us that every time we can give again instead of giving up. Every time we can choose to serve justice instead of being a bystander. Every time we can give something out of our love for one another instead of taking something for ourselves. And every time we can walk with those who suffer instead of choosing to walk away. All of those are following the call of Christ the King. Christ the King is the perfect place for us to start Advent, because that heart and that cross tell us that there is transformation happening. There's a real and worthy hope, a real king, not just this overlord, there to take advantage of whatever they can of power, trappings of power, but a servant who transforms us to love and sacrifice. And you know what else I think? I think Christ the King is the perfect place to start a new little Christian welcoming into the world. Because today we are going to baptize baby LaCrosse.